brain injury in sport. I want to give you a little bit of history and then tell you how I'm trying to address these issues or investigate these issues. And every picture that I put up is important, and there is a story to that, and I will talk about this gentleman in a little bit. This is a guy called Eli Katoa, who was playing rugby for Tonga against New Zealand, not last weekend, the weekend before, and sustained a serious brain injury, and I'll talk in more detail about that after. I'm going to caveat this with I'm not a historian. I know there's some historians sat here right now. I can see them already judging me. So I'm going to do the best I can to give a brief history of what I know. So, boxing, right? I always say to people, we can pretty much assume getting kicked and punched in the face is a bad idea. All right? If someone said to me, do you want to just stand here and let me punch you as hard as I can in the face? I'm going to go, nah, I'm all right. And in the same way, someone said, do you want to just spend all day banging your head against the wall? Most of the time I'd go, no. Sometimes when I'm with my kids, I think actually it's a better option. But generally I'd say, no thank you. So I guess most people with very little experience of those sports, the pugilistic arts, most people have an assumption it's probably quite dangerous. Right? And it's fairly obvious. You're punching people in the face and in the body as hard as you can. And we've been doing this for a long time. Not we, but boxing has existed for centuries. Right? And in the early 1900s, a guy called Harrison Martland, was that in the way? A guy called Harrison Martland, a doctor, a pathologist who performed autopsies and all sorts of stuff. There's some great pictures of this guy, by the way, like performing surgery with a cigarette. Good times, right? But a fascinating character. And he came up with this term, he wrote about this term in 1928, punch drunk. I don't know if there's a Norwegian equivalent, but punch drunk is a colloquial term a lot of people have heard of. Boxers and the boxing community, they would often describe someone as being punchy. If a boxer's punchy, that means they often would describe a boxer as punchy when they're slurring the speech, they're slow to react. It was an informal way of saying, I think that person's got brain damage, or they're punchy, they need to stop. And it started with punch drunk. And what Harrison Martland suggested in his early work was, on what he'd observed by following boxers around, was that those who got hit in the head more, so the less skilled boxers, were punch drunk, they were punchy. So that was the initial basis of that. And what we know now is what Harrison Martland called punch drunk is now, over time, has become more formalised so that it's medically called, the medical diagnosis now is something called Chronic Traumatic Encephalopathy. Now, I'm not going to address this from a clinical or medical perspective, so don't grill me on that. But that's the current state of the literature in terms of what that's now called. Okay, some of you might have read about something called CTE. Did you just say CTE? Exactly. And you happen to have an American football top on, and it's really American football that made this come mainstream. And now it's essentially like a mainstream term. If any of you are into, I don't know how many of you are into your cage fighting, but if you watch that stuff, it's basically an informal term now. So it's become mainstream, or somewhat mainstream, and I guess in most subcultures. But that's what we know now. But there's a very specific type of dementia called CTE, Chronic Traumatic Encephalopathy. And the key word there is chronic, as in it's basically incurable. We can only diagnose it once somebody's died, and it's a progressive disease. Oh, a bit hardcore that, isn't it, for a lunchtime? And we're going to get even more hardcore now. So I apologise because I know I've got some international students here, but don't worry about what that says, I'll say it. And what the literature suggests about CT in terms of the outcomes from that disease, it's linked to, well, it's a type of dementia. It can lead to depressive symptoms, ideas of suicide or committing suicide. Lots of people who've had that brain disease, once there's been an autopsy posthumous, I can never say that, but post-death, they've been diagnosed with CTE. And more generally, just from a single concussion, it's been fairly well reported you can have significant cognitive impairment. For those of you that are students, that pretty much means if you get a concussion or you bang your head, it's likely you're going to have an issue with your exam. And some of the rugby players I speak to have reported things like that. I've banged my head playing sport, I've then had to withdraw from my studies or at least pause my studies. So there are significant life-changing issues, well, obviously, from this. And there's a wealth of literature reporting this. Obviously, this isn't. I'll get into something about causal link later, but you have to remember this is a new thing. This really only started to be understood in the 90s and early 2000s in an American football context. So it's new, but there's more and more evidence building that this is an issue in sport, in contact sport. And I was actually talking to Preben about this morning. He's one of my bachelor students and we're doing something around this topic. And what I said to him was like, I think we can all see what happens when people bang their heads. We can all kind of appreciate the acute issues with when we bang heads. Lots of the people in this room are parents, right? Of young, and I can see there's parents of young kids here, me included. And you pretty much spend all your time doing this. Okay, putting your hand around the back of the head, making sure we're not banging anything. All right, because we kind of appreciate banging your head's a bad idea. So on an acute basis, do you understand what I'm saying by acute? Like the immediate, what's the word in Norwegian? Øyeblikkelig, the instantaneous. We can see if someone falls off their bike and smashes their face, it's like, oh, that looks pretty bad, that. But what we often don't appreciate, and me included, when I was playing rugby, is what that might look like in future. Okay, it might hurt then, and sometimes it might not hurt, but if I keep doing it a lot, there are consequences longer term. So if you're really interested in this stuff, I would honestly recommend you watch this. It's about boxers. It's about the prize fighters and what happens after. And I just want to point you to a case like this. This is a guy called Denny Moyer. Him and his brother were both world champions in the 60s, like middleweight or something like that. I don't know what weight class I would be actually, but whatever. All right, world champion boxers, trained by the dad. When they was amateurs, went on to be professional. If you watch this documentary, you can see how he's wearing a helmet. Both him and his brother, there's footage, there's videos, there's images. Him and his brother walking around a care home with a bike helmet on in a kind of a plastic frame to stop them banging into stuff. It's horrendous. And they're two former world champion boxers. You can see Muhammad Ali on the poster. And their dad, at 90 years old, Harry Moyer, was caring for them. It's crazy. You'd never think that you're going to be doing that. Imagine being 90 years old and caring for your children because they've got a neurological disease. They wouldn't have thought about that when they were championship boxers. And this is kind of where my research goes. We're trying to think about the long-term implications of this stuff. Because we often think of this, right? We can kind of appreciate concussion, hjernerystelse, which I like because it basically translates to brain shake. That's pretty much what's going on in your head. Okay? Last time I had, I think it was a pig's brain, and it's the first time I'd ever felt that, and it's so soft. You know, like a bowl of jelly. What do you call jelly? Gelée, that's it. Should know, kids eat it all the time. Oh, shouldn't have said that. But imagine that, and then imagine it being even softer. That's basically what a brain is, okay? And when we shake it, through things like receiving a blow to the head, like you would in boxing, we have an instantaneous neurological disorder, okay? The dizziness, the sickness, the cognitive impairment. So again, most people appreciate that. If I was to go bang in Petter's face, all right, we can all probably appreciate there's going to be some consequence there, right there and then. But again, what I'm talking about is, but if I was to do that a little bit, it probably won't hurt you. If I did that for 20 years, multiple times a week, maybe even multiple times a day, like they did in the early 1900s, that's what leads to those issues, like depression, like thinking about suicide, and you will ultimately succumb to that disease like Denny Moyer did. He died in 2010 at the age of 70 with complications related to dementia, CTE. What we don't really think about is what I've just said. The things that don't necessarily hurt, the impacts that don't produce symptoms there and then, but over time, over years, through habitual training, for example, in professional sport, that's what the literature now suggests will lead to brain damage. Okay, so we can think of it as two different ways. We can think of concussion, and again, this is not me giving you clinical medical descriptions. We can think of concussion as like the immediate acute kind of impact. Brain damage is the accumulation of these impacts over time, and many of these don't present symptoms there and then. You know, the stuff I read, often it's described as the invisible disease, and we don't see the effects of it for a lot of people until they've died, and we've been able to basically slice the brain up. And the sports, multiple sports can produce that effect. Essentially contact sports. So the people I work with, Jack for example, we say sports are structured in a way that they essentially encourage that kind of contact that leads to that brain damage. And we've got some fairly obviously looking sports that can lead to that, but it's the other sports that people are not so sure about. American football, rugby, ice hockey, heading a ball in football. There's evidence in the literature that all of those sports can lead to people developing CTE. And I'd mentioned Harrison Martland in 1928. We're essentially 100 years on now. So it's been written about for a century. We've still got examples of where I would say, have we learnt anything yet? So this guy is Shane Tamora. Anyone heard of him? Have you?
I think he tried to kill people in a building.
He didn't try, he did.
Oh, he did, yeah.
He went into a building in New York City trying to go into the NFL head office, so American football office. He shot 4 people, shot himself. The reason he did it, he said American football gave him brain damage. This was in July this year. What do you think he was diagnosed with when there was an autopsy on his body? As it was described in the media, low-level CTE. Okay, so he's 27 in 2025, and I would say, have we learned anything yet from what we know, from what Harrison Martland was writing about a century ago? So I mentioned Eli Katoa. I hope I'm saying his name right. Played for Tonga against New Zealand 2 weeks ago. Got knocked unconscious in the warm-up of that game. Takes a head injury in the first half of the game. He had what's called a head injury assessment. Plays a second half. Because he's already had one head injury assessment, he gets automatically removed from the game. Sits on the bench, has a seizure later that night, or maybe the day after, I can't remember. Has a part of his skull removed so he can reduce the pressure from the swelling of his brain. It's 2025. Okay, have we learned anything from this? I don't want to really get into that. It's a very complex case. My feelings are there's a lot of people that need to be accountable for that, but we've not got time to discuss that. The point I'm trying to give you is in 2025, these things still happen. And so, when we question it, and I'm part of a group of people that do, I'm not going to get into this paper, but it's just one example of some output we produce where we question the status quo. For example, in this particular paper, we question the utility of this campaign. in the context of youth rugby. When we do question these things, because we're questioning sport, you know, it's sport, that's what everyone says. Yeah, but it's sport, it's fine, okay? We kind of do what we want, we can become deviants, to quote Howard Becker, or outside, deviant behaviour. And it's fine because it's sport, okay? Most people wouldn't walk up to somebody in the street and just punch them in the face, right? Or my pet is looking at me like you might do. We suddenly put some gloves on or some pads, all of a sudden it's the same, it's fine, all right? So when we question the status quo, that there are some sports just by their structure can elicit these neurological diseases, and this is typically a response. You're an activist. This is activism, like it's a dirty word. Like everyone just thinks I'm going to start gluing myself to the road, stopping, which by the way is fine. But you get called that. You get called that and you get called it in a way as if there's a negative connotation. Oh, this is activism. Okay? To the point where when we've tried to produce, I need to be very careful what I say here. When we try to produce further critique of these ideas, you can see what we get called. The article's not balanced enough. It's activist in tone. Why do people say it like that's a bad thing? Oh, you're trying to improve the health of children. Activist. All right? So it's difficult. I don't think anyone logically can disagree with what I've presented, but when you're questioning an institution like sport, which has existed for multiple centuries in various forms, it's not easy to acknowledge, right? You're asking people to give up, or not give up, but modify something potentially that is the essence of their existence, right? So I get it. I get why people are negative. But it's interesting, I've been a researcher in various different contexts since about 2010. No one ever called me an activist when I was looking at like smartphone apps for health. Right? As soon as I start questioning sport and thinking, is there a better way we can preserve the health of children? I'm suddenly an activist, right? And the reason why we are is because the research isn't really there yet. And what I mean by that is, most of the stuff we know about brain injury in sport populations, they often administer tools that are just inappropriate for us understanding a person's understanding of this topic. We give really short surveys that are decontextualised and what we call snapshots. It's just instantaneous. When we know that these things are complicated, all right? Oh, don't know what happened there, but anyway. For example, the people that I work with, the work we put forward, we investigate concussion or brain injury from a sociological perspective. And when we use more sociological informed methods, i.e. we speak to people, and we speak to people over a long period of time, it becomes very clear that their understanding of these topics, it changes. Okay, my kind of epistemological position is knowledge is not static, it moves, it changes based on experience, it changes based on what we read and who we speak to and how we speak about it. And when we speak to people involved in things like combat sport, we can see how their understanding of concussion changes and move from positions of certainty to uncertainty. So there's work to be done, okay? So we're doing two things really, and part of the work I'm doing is two things. We're questioning the status quo or challenging the status quo of formal sport, but we're also challenging the status quo in the literature and how people think they can understand this topic. And again, this is what happens. When you question these things and you challenge people to reflect on their methods, that we would argue a snapshot, not really giving them a full picture, you get responses like that, okay? Literally, that was the email response. Obviously, I've not put the whole thing up. But again, I'm a researcher. I'm not an activist. Ugh, get away from me with your activism. I'm in my ivory tower doing research, my value-free neutral research, okay? Ugh, activism, ugh, like a dirty word. Again, never had that when I might have critiqued a method about using phones in sports science. So what are we trying to do? I've realised I'm running miles out of time. Okay, so I'm going to try and do this quickly. I'm trying to use sociologically informed methods to better understand people's understanding of this stuff. For example, if any of you are my participants, I'd speak to you in an interview and I'd let you think about it. I'd speak to you again and again. And I'd talk to you in a way where it's a shared understanding. Because that's my brain. That brain has been banged around a lot, okay? In my early 20s, I had a lot of fun smashing and sloshing my brain around in the context of sport, okay? So I have this shared understanding, this intersubjective understanding of what it's like to receive those brain injuries, all right? Which means that when I talk to people, I push them to think about these things because we know the effects. We know in the literature that if you get brain damage, it's going to affect the way you can be a parent. These people forget their children's names, okay? I don't know how more explicit that can be about the long-term implications. So when we have these emotional conversations, which are shared, because like I said, I understand what they're doing. I understand what it's like to play contact sport and how essential it can be to somebody's identity. But by using more sociologically informed methods, I can push the people that I know from my networks to really think about this stuff. And again, that's quite controversial to some people. What? You're challenging people in an interview. The interview should just be you just writing down what they think. Okay, and my question to anybody would be, if you can justify your position where you know something isn't right and somebody's telling you about behaviour that you know is sacrificing their health, is it more biased to just sit there and record it, or to actually push them to maybe make, I don't want to use the word better because Oystein has been catching me out on that, a different decision that might change the way they think about their health. I do not want people to stop what they're doing, okay? Well, not adults anyway. Do what you want. But I think we can all argue most people could do it from a more informed position. Some people speak to me and go, do you know what? I didn't know anything about this. I'm going to stop. Some people go, if I die on a rugby pitch, that's good for me. And again, that's their position. I'm not there to say, don't do it. I'm there to basically say, have you thought about this stuff? And I want to leave you with this because a lot of people say to me, what are you doing? You're like challenging and debating in an interview. Yes, it might appear like that. Obviously, it's well thought through. It's ethically informed what I do, but it is a bit unusual for some people, this idea that I kind of challenge and push and probe when people say things based on my position of knowing what the literature says. And the example we're using in a piece of work that's a work in progress, right? You can read that after if you want, and I'm not going to read it through from start to finish, but I think most people, if you were sat in an interview and someone was detailing and documenting child abuse, you wouldn't just go, yes, but I'm doing value-free, neutral research. I'll just write down what you've said. You would escalate it because it's basically the moral thing to do. It's something you ought to do. You're interviewing somebody and they're detailing harm, for example, to a child, you would go through the relevant ethical procedures, but you would escalate it, okay? And our argument is like when someone's detailing harm to themselves, there's something we ought to do, all right? So, yeah, I'm an activist and a researcher, and all I'm saying is it's fine to do both, and there's plenty of examples where we should. That's it, I guess. Any questions? I didn't realise I wasn't going to be introduced, by the way, so I'm pleased I just started going. But has anyone got any questions? Obviously, I'm doing a lecture in Norway. No one's going to say anything, and then you're all going to drift away, and then you're going to come to me individually and ask a really good question, but everybody should have heard. But that's fine. Oh, go on, Petter. You're just doing it to make me feel good, aren't you? Good man. I've always liked this guy.
Men har dere sett på, jeg vet ikke om det blir relevant da, men om som, altså, du har kalt det for å se var det du snakket om?
CCE?
Ja, om det kan bli redusert på noen måter. Hvis du slutter med aktiviteten.
Oh, so like reduce...
Eller ikke redusert.
I know what you're saying. I understand what you're asking. I don't really feel like I'm in a good position to answer that because it's a bit too clinical.
Yeah.
My answer would be just stop banging your head.
Yeah.
And if you're doing activities that do that, just have a think about it. But currently it's a disease that's not preventable. It's only diagnosed once somebody's died, when you fix the brain, so kind of like freeze it, slice it up, look at some protein content in it. And if you're really interested in the science of this stuff, if you look up the Boston Brain Bank, they're the kind of leaders in this stuff. That's where it all really started. But no, I don't think there's a tablet you can take. I just saw Anna put her hand up, so I'm not going to make it about you.
Takk, spennende, Matthew. Du har nevnt rugby og amerikansk fotball nå. Men finnes det idretter der det finnes regler for altså, hvordan man skal håndtere disse akutte skadene under en kamp eller...
So how you like manage it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so very happy you asked, because it's a bit awkward now. There we go. There's loads of protocols in all of these sports. I mentioned something called head injury assessment. This is a relatively new thing. The idea is that you can identify symptoms and remove the player. So he should go through some kind of short, quick cognitive testing, like basically a test on the side of the pitch, compare it to baselines, and then deem whether he's suitable to go on. So yes, the governing bodies, the people who organise sport are trying to mitigate this. I'm very happy you asked. But, and no, I didn't plan that, but 2 weeks ago, you can see, even when these protocols exist, they're not adhering to them, or they're not managing it properly. So yes, mitigation exists, protocols exist, return to play. There's a SCAT test for trying to identify these things. People are still slipping through the net at the highest level. The only reason this got investigated is because the TV channel caught the warm-up. They were just filming by accident. That's the only reason anyone knows about it for that particular instance. Does that answer your question? And just one more, with football, FIFA do have guidelines for reducing heading in kids. Why did you do that to me? Okay, you can't see. I don't know who came up first. I think you did.
Ja, nei, vi så jo utviklingen på boksesporten uten hjelm til med hjelm, ishockey med hjelm. Det noe på agendaen at man skal vurdere hjelm I den type sport, og hjelper det egentlig?
There's no evidence to support it works. Again, if you think about the reason why we know a lot about CTEs through American football, they've always worn helmets. Just think about, I bet the easiest way I'd explain it, just think about how soft the brain is and how easily it can move around. The helmet can prevent skull fractures, but it's not really doing anything to stop the brain shaking around. Like with boxing, helmets just prevent cuts to the eyes, but there's no evidence to support they reduce brain injury. You just basically put a pillow around your head and saying, yeah, you can hit me more now. So yeah, there's no evidence in the literature to support the idea that helmets reduce this stuff. Veronica.
Det jo diskutert om skal noen land som har jo sagt at barn som spiller fotball ikke skal få hedde. I Norge en ikke enig I denne type, en blir ikke enig om at man skal forby det inntil en viss årsklasse. Har dere vurdert å gjøre en refleksiv studie på hvorfor det så kontroversielt for å bestemme at I barnefotball skal det ikke være lov å hedde?
It's on its way. There's 2 students sat in here right now who are doing that. Don't want to make it awkward for them though. But we'll see what we can investigate when we interview these coaches. But yeah, what you just said is the kind of the basis of why we're trying to interview people about this. Atanu, have you changed your mind now?
I was just a bit intrigued by the activist versus researcher positioning. You are a qualitative researcher, so I would say it's rather expected that it would not be completely value-free, but rather value-laden. Right? The quantitative people like us, it's for us to pretend to be value-free.
You say pretend to be value-free, yeah? Oh yeah, I would agree. Pretend to be value-free, yeah.
But I mean, so I'm just a little bit surprised by the reviewer comments. Maybe it was too activist, perhaps, or maybe it could have been couched in maybe the activism came out as too passionate or something.
Are you saying I'm too passionate?
Yeah, country.
I don't know how much I can say, but people involved in some of the stuff we submit in the committees often are employed by sport. That's all I'm going to say. In case HVL gets fat.
Is supposed to be there.
Yeah. But as I said, you're essentially challenging like century-old institutions, commercial institutions. It's in no interest to the governing bodies of rugby league for that to happen. And it's in no interest for people to question the safety, the risks of it. Do you think smoking companies like people promoting like behaviour change to say don't smoke? It's just the same in sport. How long am I going to stand here? You're just looking at me now. I don't know what's happening. Has anybody got any more? Oh, right, wait. So has anyone got any more questions? Are you waiting for me to just say, hi there? Like when I first started here and I said to Shun, how can I say like, you can just go disappear now? And I said, oh, you say forsvinn. I said, okay, there you go, färdig nu, forsvinn. And then no one left. But yeah, if you want to speak to me now, please do. You've seen I've been promoting our live show at the Kulturhus. Come to that as well. That'll be a very different evening, very different theme, not as bleak. But yeah, if you've got more questions, come and speak to me. I'll just hang around, I guess. Oh, is this a question for everybody? Okay, do you want to speak to me after? Or do you want to speak to me now in front of everybody?
Say it now.
Okay, you waited for everyone to start clapping before you put your hand up. I appreciate that.
I was just trying to formulate it.
Okay.
Do you think it's the money involved or do you think it's the traditional?
Both. So, for example, I don't interview professional players. So you're talking about people who are just doing it as a hobby. So both, definitely. What's your name? Ole Jakob. What do you do?
I study sociology.
What do you do do you do an activity? You got a hobby?
I used to do football when I was younger.
Okay. Football was maybe very important to you at one point.
A little bit.
Okay, this isn't going the direction I'm hoping, but fine. But imagine just someone basically questioning something that gives you meaning. Not necessarily saying give it up, but saying think about it. Something you've probably just unreflectively done because you enjoy it. Remember, when in my 20s, I was loving smashing my brain around, and I love contact sport. So I've been there. I've really enjoyed doing really stupid stuff. We all do. So to question that is hard. So both, I guess. Good question. You're not going to do that again, are you? Okay, right. Tack for Meg. It's a really good question, though. Really good question. Because I'm talking